This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, I'm joined by Tim Stephens, who was APSE president in 2013-14 while he was with CBS Sports. He's currently the strategic account executive at Athlete Licensing Company. Thanks for joining me, Tim.
Erik, great to visit with you today, and excited to go down some memory lane with APSE.
How'd you get involved with APSE?
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. Short version is I screwed up. The the longer version is that my first year as sports editor at the Birmingham Post-Herald, my managing editor had been the former sports editor and was really, really big and on APSE and strongly encouraged me to get involved. And unfortunately, I was in so over my head that first year that I missed the deadline for the dues and the contest entry, and we didn't participate that first year. I felt really terrible about it, but the next year, we were all in. As a young sports editor at the time I was the youngest sports editor in the history of the paper. I really can't overstate how impactful APSE was on my career. And really, when you think about that, I mean, the first thing was APSE was the standard, okay, at coming, somebody who came up, who got involved in newspapers while I was still in high school in the late 80s, went to college and freelanced for every paper that I could, in college in the early 90s. APSE was the standard for what excellence was. And so as a young sports editor, I was soaking up everything that I could get my hands on. I read every article that I could read. I would go to the meetings or whatever, and I would look at all those sections and steal every idea that I could, and mostly network with other sports editors. And as a young sports editor trying to figure it out, I can't tell you how valuable that was in terms of learning how to be a sports editor, not be a journalist. We went to college for those things. Yeah. We had mentors in our own newsrooms for, what our standards were going to be there, but how to be a sports editor, right? And to be able to call on those veterans who, it didn't matter if they were at the Dallas Morning News or some other large newspaper that, was sort of your aspiration. Once you got into the organization, everybody was just there, and they were, whether you were at a small newspaper or a large one, you were part of the organization and had that great opportunity to really learn, develop friendships, develop mentors, and begin to shape your own philosophy within the context of what that APSE standard was. And, then the next year we won a lot of awards, and, you want to talk about validation, that was the validation for all those hours we spent, poring over those sections. To have it recognized by your peers made everything worth it at a time in my career when I really needed that. I needed that outside voice who tell me, hey, this is good. You're on the right path. Hey, maybe you missed it there. And I just couldn't say enough about what that was like in those early years. And I'm very grateful, Erik, that I grew up in the profession at the peak of newspapers, while also then being in a position to lead through some of the transformation that we've had to do. And it was just great.
Yeah. How'd you then ascend to the position that you moved into leadership and eventually president of APSE?
Well, once I got involved, there was no doubt that if someone asked me, I would probably run. Phil Kaplan recruited me. Phil was like Nick Saban. He was recruiting like crazy for membership and officers and people to get involved at the regional level. He introduced me to the officers at the time, Michael Anastasi and Jerry Ahern. And at that time, by then, I was also at the Orlando Sentinel, where really the value of APSE had been further ingrained in me. I mean, think about this. I was working alongside multiple former APSE presidents, Steve Doyle, John Sherva, Lynn Hoppes, and of course the late great Van McKenzie. So, there was no doubt that if I was asked, I was going to run. And I also think timing and circumstances definitely played a bit into that. At that time, early 2010s, we were all in the beginning stages of the digital transformation, and we had done a lot of innovative things in the early days there, going, digital first in Orlando, that I think, one, caught people's attention, and two, maybe it became a blueprint for some of the changes that we needed to make in APSE, in terms of thinking about the web. And so that put me, again, timing and circumstance. And, I think that led me to the opportunity to run and then ultimately be an officer. And, that was a big career goal for me. Very early in my early days, even before I became a sports editor, I'd kind of made my bucket list of things I wanted to do. And, being an officer at APSE was one of them. So,
what are some things you achieved in your presidency that you're most proud of?
Well, that was definitely a period of intense transformation in our newsrooms and in the organization. So my predecessors there, Jerry, Michael, Gary Howard, many others, they had done some of the real heavy lifting that our organization needed to do around diversity and mentorship and recruiting, evolving our contest. And so, we can continue today to see the results of that and some of the great work that launched us in some new directions there. By the time I was president, I was managing editor at cbssports.com, deputy managing editor at cbssports.com. And, I could see in our organization that there was a real divergence between what the large organizations were experiencing on a day-to-day basis and what the smaller organizations were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And we needed to evolve to meet both of those divergent needs. And so that led to a lot of great conversations further around the contest and the content that we presented at the conventions and the ways that we could continue to make APSE affordable and accessible to sports editors of all sizes of organizations. But then I looked at another area, and this was really something I'm really proud of. I could see in our newsrooms, due to layoffs and retirements and a lot of other things that were happening, that there was a real void beginning to be seen in terms of institutional knowledge in our organizations, right? And how would we as an organization connect to that next generation of potential sports editors? How could we make APSE relevant to people who were coming into the industry in very different dynamics than most of the leadership of APSE at that time had come through, right? How did we be relevant and connect to young people and help them see the value of APSE that we saw? And how could we deliver that value, which for them might be different than what we said? So we started student chapters. And, that was a big thing, a student contest, a mentorship into the college programs. It developed a lot of relationships, not only with students, but also with educators in those programs that began to help us align what was happening in the colleges with what we were going to need in our newsrooms, so that we were, when we were hiring young people right out of college, that they were ready to come in and make a difference right away. And also that they would understand how APSE could help them. And that we were in a position to help them. So launching student chapters was a big thing for us. And then other one that I have to say that happened during some of that time, we continued to foster our relationship with the Associated Press. There were some fireworks back in those eras, both during my term and in a couple of my predecessors, as we began to fit how we best align with AP. And we were able to come up with some ways there through some really good conversations with AP that I think strengthened our organization and that relationship.
What's some of the work that went into getting things going with the student chapters and starting such a new section almost of APSE?
Oh, great question there. And I'll say it this way. I was experiencing as a student myself. I had decided at age 45, while I was running CBS Sports day to day and president of APSE, that I'd also go back to college. I had turned pro early, as they say, back in the 90s to go. I gave up my scholarship at UAB to go earn $25 a story at the Post-Herald and eventually work my way up to sports editor. But, I went back to college to complete my degree. And one of the things that I did as research during that time actually greatly informed our strategies for student chapters. I surveyed hundreds of educators and APSE membership on how were the colleges preparing their graduates, what were the student expectations, and how did the faculty think that they were doing in terms of meeting our needs. And we found some big gaps in that, where the perceptions were maybe not in alignment. And that further validated that, hey, we really needed to look at student chapters and getting involved at the collegiate level. So I think during my term, I think we announced our first 3 chapters at my final convention. Those were my alma mater, UAB, University of Ohio, and I think the third was Oklahoma State. Virginia Tech was there around the same time as well. And those became ways that, over time we evolved into really leading those through their regions. And we began to go to college campuses for some of our region meetings, which I think also helped. And then the student contest became a thing there that I think really further put APSE out front. Just thinking back to my own days, what it would have meant to me as a college student to have not just won a collegiate journalism award, but to have won something that was recognized and judged by the professionals from APSE would have been huge for me. Yeah. And almost everybody that I ever worked with on the student paper would have loved that opportunity too. So those were some of the things we did.
Yeah, I ran the student contest the past 3 years, and the students just being in the top 10, like you can tell how excited they are, and especially the winner then of that each year.
Yeah, looking at that, and this didn't happen. This happened when in my first year at as a sports editor, when my first APSE convention that I went to the convention in Dallas in 2003. We'd won a lot of awards. I'd actually won columns in the Post-Herald division, and our staff just did an amazing job that year to win everything that we could win. And I think back to what it meant to me when Dave Smith from Dallas pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I judged your category. You guys' stuff was as good as the big boys," right? The validation that meant, I don't care if anything else of note happened at that convention, to hear that from someone that I respected so much, just meant a tremendous amount to me personally, but to go back to our staff and say that to our staff, right, meant a lot as well. So thinking about it from a student perspective, to hear that while you're still in college would mean a lot, I know.
Yeah. Talking about the encouraging words Dave Smith gave you, what has APSE meant to you professionally?
Oh, it was pretty much, gosh, where do I start? First, APSE showed me what great sports journalism was, what it looked like, how it was executed, what were the standards of excellence. I think it meant a lot to me, professionally, and I made 3 career moves through connections at APSE, right? Literally, twice during the convention, I accepted new jobs, and that was something that was, obviously an important part. Sometimes I wondered, were my former papers, were they going to keep sending people if people kept getting jobs, right? But I'll never forget that 2003 event. We had won a lot of awards, and I kind of knew that, okay, maybe it would be time for me to move on from Birmingham to a new opportunity. And so I was there at the convention and networking with everybody, and I had made this list of sports editors that I wanted to make sure that I saw. And what would be my choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, just like I was a football recruit, right? Who do I want to talk to? And Orlando was number 1 on my list. And the reason was, every time I had been in Orlando covering an event, I would pick up a copy of the Sentinel and just be blown away by how good it was during that time. And I'm like, if I want to be a great sports editor, that's where I want to go. Look at their staff. They have John Sherva, who at that time was the APSE president. They have Lynn Hoppes, who's one of the top young sports editors in the country. they have all of these great writers who'd been at all these different places. And then they have Van McKenzie, who was just this legendary sports editor who had been the managing editor of the National back when I was, like a middle school. That was a big deal back in the 80s, right? And I'm like, that if I want to be a great sports editor, that's where you go. And so, it's kind of neat to get to meet the people at Orlando there. And it was, I was actually at the convention, and we were negotiating my salary on a cocktail napkin while I was going back and forth to pick up our plaques. But it was just kind of a funny story. But my wife at the time was doing those negotiations, acting as my agent. And years later, when time later after I'd been at Orlando a while, I'm doing my 6-month review, and I said, "Lynn, so why'd you hire me?" And he goes, "Well, truth be told, I wanted to hire your wife, but but that was great, and I really enjoyed my time there. At Orlando, it was, that was like the peak of newspapers. Okay, that's the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, 2005. I got to be part of the planning for hosting a convention in Orlando during that time. I got to be part of judging, obviously, because we were there in Orlando a lot. Got to really meet everybody in the organization. And I got to see Van McKenzie in his element every day, leading a very dynamic and talented staff. The people who ran through the Sentinel at that time, like, it was the launching pad for so many careers who would, go on to the Washington Post or ESPN, and it was just a place of creativity that, I couldn't, if I were to start my career over and you've got to make all these changes, I'm like, that's the non-negotiable. We're not changing my time in Orlando, right? Because I got to see APSE at its very best, and I got to see some of the best that APSE has ever produced, all working together on the same paper. Is great.
What has APSE meant to you personally over the years?
Friendships, memories, tons and tons and tons of inspiration. At this stage in my career, I've made a career path out of sports journalism. I'm still in sports and have done a lot of things in the startup and tech industry, involving, typically social media. And, I've called on that experience to this day. But I think the big thing about APSE is I know that if I needed to, I could call on so many people in this organization, people whose work I respect, people who I know personally. I know their character. I know how incredibly awesome and talented they are, and I could call on them, and I'd get some help right away, right? I particularly love to see so many talented young people who are now in their own time of leadership, right? People such as yourself, right, who came up through the organization very similarly to the way I did, who are now in positions of leadership and making their own impact. I think back to some of our people, who came through our mentoring programs, or developed relationships with sports editors that have now helped them make impact. And I love seeing that. I love seeing the ability for APSE to continue to be relevant. And it's still relevant for me, even though I'm not in sports journalism.
Yeah. What's some advice you would give to future APSE presidents?
Make sure you go back and look at the tenure of Todd M. Adams, and whatever he did, don't do. I'm just kidding. Todd was fabulous. Todd was, obviously our president. I had the opportunity to work with Todd in Orlando. He was my right hand deputy sports editor, and that was a relationship forged through APSE, right? Being able to, I met him when he was a young sports editor at a small paper, and then he worked his way up and eventually joined us in Orlando, did some great work there, became president himself. Looking at, there was a unique time there when I was president, and where we had like a run of presidents with Alabama ties. We called ourselves the Bama Slammers. And Tommy Dees from the Tuscaloosa News, myself, who had background in Birmingham, and then John Bednarowski from Marietta. John, like me, went to UAB, and it's not like UAB is Missouri or Northwestern or something, but that was pretty cool for a little old kaleidoscope to have two APSE officers at the same time.
Yeah.
So that was great. Being able to be part of the planning of the conventions was some of the most fun things that you could do. And particularly, I always enjoyed the sessions where we planned the content, right? And being able, we have some spirited debates over what should be part of that content, because we're really trying to evolve and be relevant and give something meaningful. And if you think about it in the context of their organization and what was happening then, and still probably true to this day, a lot of us were having to come out of pocket for this. Our organizations were not supporting, going to events like conferences or judging in the same way that they once did. Or if they were, we really needed to justify it by bringing things back of value that would actually show up in our newsroom. And we were very aware of that in our planning, that, this wasn't just going to be a time to gather and, meet up in a hospitality room and small talk. We were there to bring some value back to our newsroom and to our staff, and that was a big part of our thinking. And then also, I'd have to say this part of my APSE memory and experience, that I can't say enough about what a legend Van McKenzie was. I mean, just what a giant. There was probably never be another one like him in our business, with that sort of huge dynamic personality and willingness to just go for it. There toward the end of his tenure, Van unfortunately was diagnosed with cancer, and we knew that he was very sick. And one of the most memorable things that I think I'd ever experienced, we had a who's who of journalism basically meet at Van's house. All the former employees, people from the National, there's some huge names in our business who came there to basically tell Van we loved him. Right. And, the stories that everybody told were just amazing. All these great Van stories, and, this is love we felt for him, the respect we felt for them. Van's tree of journalists, it would rival any coaching tree ever. You know what I mean? Of all the people who had ties to Van. And at that time, I had been up for a sports editor role. I was an assistant in Orlando, and I had been up kind of my first time to go for a big job as a sports editor. And, for many different reasons, it didn't work out. And, I was pretty disappointed. But I also really loved my role at the Sentinel and was very happy there. And, Van by this time was pretty sick. He was not in the day-to-day of our newsroom. But we're at this event, and we're all took turns going to his big chair where he was sitting and whispering in his ear. And, when it was my turn, he pulled me close, and he looked right into my eyes, and, he whispered in my ear. He said, "I know about that thing." He goes, "I just want you to know you're already a sports editor, and you're a great one, and your time's coming." Yeah. And that just was, it means a ton to me to this day that he took the time to say that. And, anybody who worked for Van would tell you that he was big, he was larger than life, and he could be explosive, and he knew what he wanted, and you had a certain standard you needed to meet. But Van McKenzie was not a sports editor. Van McKenzie was a legendary coach of talent, an identifier of talent. And I learned so much about recruit great people, put them in a position to succeed. And my job as sports editor was not so much to edit them. It was to remove the excuses and get things out of their way so they could do their best work. Right. And yeah, sure, we did editing and we talked about great stories and all those other things. But a big part of my role was to get the noise out of their way so that they could do their best stuff. And Van taught me that.
Is there anything else you want to share about what went into putting on the couple conferences you talked about being involved in, whether there was the one in Orlando or the one in DC, Arlington, or?
Yeah. So we had the Chicago conference, the Boston conference, the DC conference, and the DC conference was my year as president. And Tommy D's made a lot of this happen. We went for John McCain and somehow got him to speak, and Tommy's really the one who made that happen. But what a treat that was to have John McCain come, regardless of what your politics were. John McCain obviously is an American hero, and he was very, very kind to come speak to us about sports and things that he was very passionate about in sports. So that was great. I always loved the Red Smith Awards and being able to present those. And particularly, it wasn't the year I was president, but I was an officer. Frank DeFord, when we presented to Frank DeFord, that meant the world to me, because he was who I grew up reading. Frank DeFord was like the standard bearer for writing for me. I read everything with his name on it that I could ever get my hands on. I would go to the library as a kid and pour through old Sports Illustrateds and find Frank DeFord. I didn't read about Frank DeFord, I would read. And so getting to meet him was great. And then the conferences, when we had the one there in Orlando, that was Van's baby. And I mean, like, Van was going to go all out. I remember we got this giant gorilla thing. I don't even know what it was. And, Van wanted every little detail of that conference to say Orlando and to put our best foot forward. And so that was always big. Van approached that conference like he did those big football sections we used to do, where no idea was too crazy. By no idea too crazy, I mean, like Van would just go for it. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add about your involvement with APSE, or any other memories you want to share?
Yeah, sure. I've made a transition from sports journalism to kind of the sports startup world around tech. Yeah. But I'm looking forward to getting back involved as things begin to settle in my life a bit, get to some judging. I'd love to meet some of these talented younger sports editors that are now, blazing their own trail. I'd love to get back in judging, and I would tell anybody, and we're always looking for judges, I know, one of the best things that you can do as a member of APSE is judge that contest. Yes, it's a time commitment, but you will gain so much from it. Whether you're a sports editor and you're going to then look at, okay, who won those awards, who's pretty talented, who do I need to hire someday, to just, great ideas. It's always inspiring. And the relationships you will develop in judging are the ones that will carry you through the organization. You really get to know people when you spend a couple of days with them locked up in a room reading. And those are the relationships that will become your baseline in this organization. And they'll help you grow in the organization by participating in that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time, Tim.
Really appreciate it, Eric. And good luck to everybody in APSE. Good luck in the contest.
Thanks.